Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast where we are going to discuss how AI and automation are changing global consulting. And before we begin, the opinions shared in this podcast are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the views of our employer. And to do that, I'm thrilled to welcome someone who's not just a business leader, he's a trailblazer lighting the way at the crossroads of technology and business, Vijayashanker. He's a captain, steering through the fast-moving currents of AI and automation, charting new courses for global consulting to flourish and adapt. He's like a torchbearer, illuminating paths where others might see only fog and uncertainty. Vijay's journey is a tapestry woven from hands-on engineering and orchestration of major transformations at giants like IBM, MongoDB, and SAP. Add in fresh perspectives from his executive education at Harvard, and you get a navigator who knows every twist and turn of this evolving landscape. If the future of consulting is an expedition into uncharted territory, Vijay is the seasoned guide you want leading the charge. In our conversation, Vijay will unpack how AI and automation act as a bionic mind for businesses, amplifying the strengths of global organizations, making consulting faster, smarter, and more agile than ever before. His experiences embody how technology isn't just a tool, but a creative partner helping businesses solve today's puzzles and invent tomorrow's solutions. I can't wait to set sail on this insightful journey with him. So, Vijay, let's dive straight in. How is AI and automation fundamentally transforming global consulting today?
Probably the most disruptive technology trend in my lifetime so far, right? And this is something I say fully knowing what is happening or what is going to happen in quantum, right? Which is another massive breakthrough about to happen, right? In a commercial sense in a few years, right? Maybe 5 years or so. It is the first time, really, right? Where machines can think for themselves and act and don't have to wait for humans to tell them if this, then do that, right? So it is a very big change to the basic idea of how software programs worked so far. So it'll change everything, no question. We may not even realize all the secondary and tertiary impacts. It is also very easy to get carried away by hype. I don't quite buy into artificial general intelligence, artificial super intelligence, so on. Those things could happen, not saying no. But as it exists today, we more or less know for sure that outside the distribution of the data that it knows, these models cannot really do anything, right? So its ability to generalize is largely by teaching it more and more things and giving it more data to crunch through. So it's very, very easy to get carried away because, obviously these startups that are doing it are all having massive valuations, probably justified. I don't know whether you need the hype to justify the valuation because even without the hype, it can already do tremendous things. So, yeah, not a big fan of the hype, but from my own day to day usage, right? I do see it being supremely useful as an engineer. I am so convinced that there is no future of software engineering that does not have a lot of AI agents helping human programmers. I don't develop any code anymore that I type from scratch. In any case, I was not typing from scratch. I was looking up, for snippets in Stack Overflow or just Googling stuff and so on, right? So it's not new. It's just a whole different level when an intelligent piece of software helps me with practically every bit of software engineering. It's about as good as having a 2-year experienced software developer sitting by your side, willing to jump in and do a lot of the grunt work. When I can sit back and think about the big picture, how things interact with each other, so on and so forth, and also obviously make small corrections where the machine gets it wrong. But that future, right? It's not like 5 years away. It's right here. A handful of things probably it cannot do very well, like quality and so on, will also get fixed along the way. So a bunch of what we do definitely is going to get disrupted, no question. There are obstacles, like, for example, compute is always going to be a limitation. There are only like 4 or 5 companies who have the ability to manufacture semiconductor chips and GPUs and so on. So that is always going to be a limitation. Power supply is always going to be a limitation. Capable AI talent is going to be a limitation. Regulations always going to be a limitation. Inertia, right? Dealing with, in consulting, we're dealing with largely large companies, who are not used to moving fast. So inertia will be a limitation. So it's not like, things will change in a hurry, because all these factors, how much of a fast you want, right? These are real problems that you need to find, right? Even if you want to do, you know, everything with AI, only so many GPUs, and it's going to be manufactured by only a handful of companies, right? So the fab capacity is not something that will increase overnight, right? So knowing all these limitations, we can still easily predict how much of displacement will happen in how we do consulting today. And of all those things, my favorite at the moment is software development, right? On how that changes. I think that will be the biggest near term change that we'll see.
Fantastic insights, Vijay. And I think, coming from you, who is really a hands on person and also at that level who's meeting CXOs, I'd like to come to the next point around the change that you see in clients' behaviors as they consume consulting with AI. What changes do you see?
A lot. The good thing is everybody's kind of bought in, and we have ChatGPT to thank for that, right? So it's one thing to have AI do cool things, like, for example, risk management, fraud calculations, and all, right? Have been using AI for a long time, right? All financial institutions have been using AI for, or at least classic machine learning, right? For a long time. Common man did not realize any of these things. Like a good example, right? If you look at your phone and see how much of battery is left, it is not like an old school fuel tank, right? Where it is calibrating mechanically. It's essentially a prediction based on your usage on how much more battery life is left. That's machine learning, right? How many people who use a phone realize that it is machine learning that is doing it, right? So it's been around for a while, right? We can make arguments on what is machine learning, what is AI, and symbolic versus deep learning, and blah blah. But the larger point is machines helping us in this regard, and having a probabilistic architecture. It's something that has been around for a while. That's not new. But ChatGPT suddenly put it in a product that just made the point supremely obvious to everybody. What that has resulted in is, instead of waiting for engineers to bubble up an idea through the CIO organization or CTO organization all the way to the board, now it's coming the other way around. Boards have gotten super excited. They see the possibilities, and they're pushing the operations team or the operating team, right? The CEO and his team to push for more, right? So a very common thing that we hear when you walk into a consulting is, if we have a mandate to put 5 use cases into production, as an example, right? This is happening quite a bit in Americas, right? They know that all the limitations, right? Like, for example, I work very closely with financial services, and you cannot do things that regulators won't allow you to. And regulators will not allow a lot of fast innovation, and for good reason, right? They want to be sure that consumers are not hurt, right? And we don't do reckless things and so on, right? So a lot of autonomous decision making that AI can do in regulated industries, that is pretty hard to pull off. So in regulated industries, it will probably be more mundane things in the back office that get a lift, where you can scan documents, figure out what it is, and do something about it. Millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars are spent today without that help. So for AI to help regulated industries, I don't think regulation will be the primary challenge, because there are many mundane processes that are very expensive and time consuming and needs boring human labor to do, where you can free up that labor to go do more interesting, higher value things. So those are the big changes that I see in consulting. This idea of AI agents helping with coding, fast catching up, not mainstream, right? People are still getting used to solutions, from the Gen AI providers and agentic providers. So it's still very, very new. This idea of vibe coding, since Karpathy came out with that earlier in Q1 of this year, already has gotten enough attention, right? Even old obsolete developers like me immediately took on to that. And it has steadily improved, right? So these things will change. But at the moment, nobody is rushing in and putting like 50% of their processes on AI enabled things, but nobody is shying either, right? It doesn't need to be sold. So you're largely preaching to the choir, right? Consulting does not have to convince clients to use AI anymore. the conversation is much more meaningful compared to, say, 10 years ago when I led the AI initiative at my employer. We had to convince clients, and I had to do these 15 minutes of a speech on probability and how to switch your mind frame from binary decisions or Boolean decisions to more of a probabilistic outlook. That kind of discussion is not needed anymore, right? Because clients have already bought in, right? They see. And we largely have to thank ChatGPT for it, right? To show the world the power of AI, that product, not just the model. Model, we can argue whether other people have better models and so on. ChatGPT has amazing models, as in OpenAI has freaking amazing models, no question on that. But it's not the model, it's a product that made all the difference. And that is something that consulting might be the way that most clients get the benefit, because it doesn't matter how good the technology is till you put it into a great product. It is tough, right? So we need more visionaries along the lines of like Steve Jobs, right? Because if you think about iPhone and iPad and so on, nothing there was net new, right? UI was already, or GUI was already discovered, right? Or invented at Park Labs, right? What Jobs did was put a lot of great ideas together, packaged it, and made it useful to the world, right? It's his vision about a product that made it very successful, right? Technology was just a means to an end. So I think AI and Gen AI is also going in that same direction where we are starting to take technology for granted. Technology also has a long ways to go. Lots of things. I mean, AI still hallucinates and we don't have great solutions yet. That product vision is something that I think consulting will make a big difference. And that's probably where a good bit of consulting help will happen in the near future. Other things, for example, the change management effort needed to make AI happen in a large organization is huge. And just to put a finer point on it, 25 years ago, right, the equivalent of Gen AI in those days were SAP and Oracle ERP. Those things needed massive change management because people used to working one way for 20, 30 years of their career. It's not easy to shift their mind to a different way of working. An integrated solution that did inventory management and sales and finance and HR was too much for most people to comprehend, right? When I started my career. Now that is the only way people know how to do it. So when AI now suddenly interferes with their workflows, it's going to be a challenge. And that change management is also something that I think consulting companies will be very good at managing for clients. As examples,
Sure.
there are many more, right? I just wanted to throw a few out.
No, absolutely. And Vijay, I think you have touched on many, many topics, right? From the hype that the AI created versus the practical implementation, implications versus the regulated industry and how it regulates innovation versus the client's acceptability of this innovation. And that, yes, if there is a use case that could be, that could be put into a product, it can be easily consumed. So yes, I think those are great insights. Thank you. Just related to this, terms of the AI innovations, what sort of innovations you see are driving the biggest sort of change and impact in consulting? For example, if you look within supply chain, right? We see inventory optimization, route optimizations. We see warehouse sort of management becoming a bit more automated, et cetera, et cetera. So where do you see some of those innovations impacting the industry?
So we have to think about this in two paths. Path one, putting AI to make things a little bit better, as an incrementally better. So if you have an optimization algorithm, maybe with AI, you can have an even better optimization algorithm where some of the information captured in unstructured data and video and so on can be used to make the experience better, right? Or a process improved better. That in itself is pretty huge value. And but also less disruptive, right? You can continue with a workflow and just each part of the workflow just gets a little bit faster. I mean, in the simplest of terms, right? One of the things that everybody, most people need to do is this thing called MRP, right? The resource planning for manufacturing, right?
Yes.
So MRP runs are time consuming activities, right? Because it needs to consider a lot of parameters and many companies have tens of thousands of SKUs. If you speed up the MRP, it has tangible impact on the life cycle of a supply chain, right? And including how quickly somebody, an end consumer gets a product or can do a return and so on, right? It all depends on one MRP run, which nobody knows about other than the people working in the supply chain department in the back office. So speeding that up was already a good thing. And, the Amazons of the world and Walmarts of the world are all masters at doing it, right? So those kinds of incremental changes are always happening, right? Faster databases like SAP coming up with S4 HANA. I used to work in SAP in the past, right? This was one of the things, right? There are many processes where you can just massively increase speed by just having a better designed database without changing really very much of the business process at all. So those kinds of changes were already happening. AI will do those kinds of changes too in a different level, by consuming more content, getting intelligence out of more sources, combining that in meaningful ways, so on and so forth. Great efficiency. So obviously a more productive way of doing this and less disruptive. And that's probably where the first generation of AI solutions will help. But if you look to the future, I think you will reimagine processes. And I'll tell you my favorite example. I've written about this a couple of times. So I'm a heavy coffee drinker and I don't experiment very much with coffee. It's the same 2 or 3 types of coffee that I always buy. This is a perfect example of something that I can offload to a system. I don't need to go check for coffee and so on, right? So let's say I offload it to my digital agent to go buy coffee every 30 days, right? First of every month, go buy me some coffee and have it sent to my home. If that is the case, if I offload it to my digital assistant, does the grocer, do they need to send me a printout showing discounts and different types of coffee available? Because I'm not going to use that information at all, right? I've offloaded it to a machine. So if anybody has to market to somebody, it is a grocery business needing to market to my digital assistant, not to me. And if they're marketing to a machine, you don't need the colorful pamphlet, right? You need to do it in some kind of a computer understandable format, right? In a JSON file or something, right? Maybe in binary. And if that is true, do you need a human on the other side to do that? Or would it be a machine on the other side, right? So it could just be 2 AI agents, my AI agent talking to Walmart's AI agent, right? Doing that transaction. Then there are secondary and tertiary effects of such situations. So if you don't need to print those things, do we actually need so many printing houses? Do we need as many marketing agencies? Do we need a different kind of data scientists, etc.? So think about how much the process will reinvent itself, right? As we offload more and more of these kinds of things. And then we probably need more cognitive science and so on to kick in as well. Because what happens when a new brand of coffee comes up? How do you get my attention? Because I no longer think about coffee because this is just happening behind the scenes, right? So you need a different type of marketing, right, to get my attention, which is very different from conventional marketing, right? So these two angles will both happen, right? Incremental progress where we are putting, embedding or infusing AI into existing things as phase one, still very highly valuable. And then completely reimagining, like this coffee ordering example that I said, where the human involvement is very limited, but human is extremely happy, right? Like my agent can go negotiate with the agents of several other groceries and find me better deals, um, so on and so forth, right? So the secondary, tertiary workflows that will kick off, mind boggling, right? But all generally possible with technologies we already have. So, yeah, so that's how I feel this proceeding.
I think it is very interesting the way you describe the digital assistant doing a persona of you and ordering on your behalf, and maybe not just the coffee, your entire grocery list. And maybe, if you expand the use cases further, if you like your clothing, your other shopping, pet food, so on and so forth. So I think you answered kind of the second question that I was leading to in terms of speed and agility. I think that is the first use case, and people have already benefited humongously, consulting companies as well as clients in this space. Which brings me to another interesting point in terms of the consultant-client relationships with the technology evolution. Your thoughts on this, Vijay?
This has always been a constantly evolving thing, right? If I look at the first, say, 2 or 3 projects that I did as a young engineer, right, in the late 90s, as a 25-year-old, was asked to use EDI to re-engineer the third-party logistics of a big aftermarket supplier in Detroit, Michigan. Right. The funny part is I had no idea what third-party logistics meant, nor did I know what EDI is. But that was the problem statement. The client interviewed me, thought that I was smart enough to figure it out, and said, "Okay, go do it." And I did it. And because in those days, it was completely okay for me to go meet with the head of supply chain and the head of inventory and the head, the COO of the company, the CFO of the company. And they would treat me like their son, is how it worked out, right? Tremendous relationship. And they got a lot in return. They would pay for 8 hours of my work. And I was easily working 18 hours, right? On average. Never once thought of it as a hardship, right? Because I was also learning a lot. A client had a lot of trust in me. And they never held a gun to my head. They also knew that everything was new and we were going to experiment together and make it work. And we made it work. There was never a question of giving up, right? We always made it work. So another one was a logistics company that wanted to put a from and to address on its homepage, and you had to click a button and create the shipping label, right? So, which, essentially you need to go to a backend SAP system, calculate the price and tax, and print a label. In today's world, that's a given. In 2000, internet is still fairly new. I did not know HTML. I learned Java on that project. I knew ABAP, SAP's programming language. So I could do the backend fairly easily. Then I had to write a C connector to make this work between the Java program and the SAP program. And again, it just was largely a lot of net new learning and applying it. And it was co-creation. The client was in it with me. We didn't have great load balancers at the time. So with available load balancing techniques, we had to do a lot of hacking to hold it together. Uh, Parallel processing still in its infancy. Multi-core processors were just coming out. Most of the software did not know how to make use of two cores on a CPU, so on and so forth. So you learned a lot while doing these things. And clients also knew that a priori, you're finding consultants who are just very smart problem solvers, right? And willing to work hard. But nobody ever asked me, hey, do you know this Java version? Or have you worked with CSS before? All of which would have been no. But they just asked me questions to figure out if I'm a good problem solver, a good engineer, and then just allowed me to do it. And they were involved in it from day one. If fast forward, say 25 years, not at all how consulting works anymore, right? Because now the starting questions itself often for technology consulting, not for business consulting. Business consulting is still very, kind of old school. But in technology consulting, stack is a priori decided, right? So you're asked, how well do you know this version of Java or this version of Spring Boot? Have you worked in this specific kind of testing in the past? How well do you know how to use Selenium or Puppet and Chef or something, right? Depending on the scenario. I'm like I feel sorry for the younger colleagues who join the business now because they're never going to get the kind of learning that my generation and previous generations got. And also the interesting part is product companies don't work this way, right? Product companies find the problem to be solved. They figure out the stack that is best suitable for that. And let's say that needs Scala. And if none of the developers know Scala, they'll probably go hire one guy who knows Scala and everybody else just picks it up along the way. That is how product companies largely work, right? There are exceptions to this, but that's how they largely work. Consulting somehow has moved away from that and has started to be a little less realistic on how to go after these solutions and put too much emphasis on a stack and then having people. So essentially, the world is moving more towards buying arms and legs and less towards hiring brains. I kind of feel very sad about it. Enlightened clients that thankfully still exist, and it's a pleasure working with them. Unfortunately, the mainstream way is, and I think it's largely because of the ease of procurement. because then you can drive towards a rate card, and you think you can scale better and so on. If people are honest and they look back at how these things worked compared to hiring good problem solvers and thinking in terms of an outcome, the difference will be absolutely stark. But in the name of standardizing and perceived efficiency, we do crazy things, right? In this world, I think clients and consulting companies should sit together and evolve this. And this will anyway need some evolution when AI takes a major role in software development and product management, right? And every aspect of it, right? How do you create documentation? How do you create and simulate user experience? So on and so forth. Everything will get disrupted. So now is a good time for the industry to come together and figure out what is the model that works best. And I seriously, seriously hope we will go back to the world where people looked for great problem solvers and leave this fascination for stack. Because think about it, technology is changing so fast that what is the point in asking for somebody who has 7 years experience in some version of Java? I mean, yeah, sure. Syntax helps, some prior experience helps. Those are all good things. But those are all things that now AI can do, 80% as good as a human developer. So do you really need to worry about a priori deciding these things? Or would you rather find the best solution for the problem instead of looking for this weird combination of skills and so on, right? So that is how I think now is a good point in time for the industry to come together and think about what is the optimal model, right, for this disruptive future that we are walking into.
This is so sort of relating to me as a person. I remember my younger years when I think late 90s, when the internet language you spoke about Java, Microsoft came up with its own ASP, active server pages. And I was just handed over a book by my project manager, go read and then go code. And he got the client talking to me on topics around, this is how I want the UI, this is what they need to do. But the client knew this is new. I knew this is new, and my company knew this is new. But despite all of those challenges, we were sort of, working with each other as human beings, not as commodities or as people buying, services from different consulting companies. It resonates so well with me, Vijay. Now, thank you for bringing those. And yes, I think this is a call to the industry, both consulting companies and clients alike, to come on board and see how that human empathy and, all the relationships, they can be brought on board. Yes, with the catalyst, of AI and technology supporting in the journey.
Yeah, I mean, skills is one part of it. The other is IP, right? See, consulting companies work with a lot of clients. When you only look for a handful of skills like knowledge of a certain stack or programming language and so on, you're missing out on IP, right? The way you should actually evaluate a technology consulting company, I keep going back to technology consulting because that is my background, right? I'm less of a business consultant, right, compared to a technology consultant. You should look for, hey, how can you accelerate or increase the quality of the outcome as opposed to the arms and legs doing this thing, right? You need to shift your thinking because who really cares? I mean, the software is not going to put a footnote there saying that, oh, this one was developed by somebody with 12 years of Java experience. Nobody cares, right? So if you shift the thinking to the outcome, you'll immediately realize that skill of the human developer is only a small part of it. What you should actually buy from a consulting company is their collective experience, which is represented in methodologies and assets and thought leadership, as opposed to individual skills. Individual skills, essentially, think about it, right? You're paying money where you could have bought brains and you only bought arms and legs, right? And same thing for consulting companies too. 50% of the onus is on the provider, right? The provider should also position themselves in that way that, hey, for the same dollars that you're spending, we could give you a lot more of our brains than just arms and legs.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think that leads me to that part around skills, right, that you mentioned. And I'll combine two into one, right? What would be the role of consultants as AI evolves, right? More and more and more, and we see the AI era being the new innovation coming in, in days rather than in months or in, even in weeks, in years. And what sort of skills would the consultants need to survive in this disruptive era of AI?
So largely better skills in logic, problem solving, etc. Right? Basic first principles based thinking to know whether AI is giving a good solution or not. Because the way generative AI, right, with this autoregressive solution of just predicting the next token is how most of these things are created, which means if you make an error early in the process, the error just keeps getting bigger and bigger along the way, right? So the human user who is working with the computer needs to be smart enough to know whether that has happened, right? Whether is this a widely bad answer, because it will look pretty good, right? So AI is good enough to make it look good. It doesn't mean that that's the right answer. So we need good problem solvers, good people with a fundamental grasp of engineering to be the ones working with. When I say engineering, don't take it literally, right? If you're a business consultant, then your domain in that fashion. That is a given, right? So you need to be really good at that. You need to be very, very good at pattern recognition and so on, right? To make sure that you're working with the machine in the best possible way. Lot of product management thinking, because a lot of this grunt work, when it goes away, the make or break of whether a solution works or not will shift more and more towards product management, less and less towards engineering, because the engineering effort will be less. Also, a lot more can be done a good way to think about it is, say a scrum team today is like 10 people, right? The scrum team of tomorrow might be 4 people working with a lot of AI, which means the roles will suddenly change, right? So do you need like a scrum master anymore to groom your backlog and keep you on track and so on? Or can AI do that better? If AI does that better, what happens if something bad happens? So basically our basic operating model on agile and scaled agile and so on, we need to rethink, right, on which roles are augmented or replaced by computers, right, or by AI, right? That will change how we fundamentally operate. But it also means now a lot more problems can be tackled. See, today at all points, there's a linear dependency on the number of people who can be committed or the number of dollars that can be committed. So when AI can do a lot, people think that, oh my God, then all these consultants and all these engineers will all sit at home. I don't think that is ever going to happen. I think what will happen instead is a lot more problems will get solved. So instead of having 4 scrum teams with 10 people each, we might just shift to a model of 10 scrum teams with 4 people each. And a lot of the work done by AIs, unit cost of getting any given problem comes down a lot, so on and so forth. So I think that is how we should rethink problem solving in this AI driven era coming up. And when I say coming up, this is not 10 years into the future. We are talking about like a year or 2 years into the future. So, and the classic wisdom was the future is already here, just unevenly distributed. This will not be unevenly distributed. I think this will be pretty democratized, right? So we have to be ready for this disruption. I'm not sure how many people actually are. And this basic curiosity to unlearn and learn, that needs to go up significantly if we have to catch up, right? So a lot of my own challenge when I try to learn something new is the unlearning takes a lot of time and energy, right? Because you've been used to working a certain way for a long, long time, that it is pretty tough to unlearn that and, on with a new way of working. Like for the first, say, 2 months of working with code completion and so on with the new tools, like Replit and Cursor and so on, I fought, right? As in my DNA was not agreeing with this, right? Because I have an unhealthy ego of my strength in software engineering, that I was fighting it and thinking about, oh, maybe this is wrong, maybe this is not the best way to do it and so on. But thankfully, I kept with it, and now I no longer think so, right? So I know where it needs a human intervention, but for the most part, it doesn't. So this ability to unlearn, it is tougher than what most people might think. It was definitely tough for me, continues to be tough for me. So yeah, so the change will be definitely. And also, what does that mean? It means how we select people to be consultants or to be engineers, how we promote people and so on. all need to be rethought. How many HR departments at our clients and at our own firms are smart enough now to be thinking about, how do we evaluate new talent? So, like, for example, like a default opinion I heard lately was, oh, maybe we should just go back to which schools they went to and assume that the school did it right. My own daughter is a senior, doing computer science at the local university. When I look at her curriculum, I'm not convinced that universities are on top of this either, right? So, I mean, smart kids, and they obviously are way smarter and getting a much better education than I did, 30 some years ago, but not for the future that we are walking into. So, which means the onus is still on the industry to figure out how to evaluate talent, how to hire, how to train, because a lot of conventional training is no longer required because AI can summarize and AI can surface based on what the individual already knows and so on, right? So, this idea of standardizing training and so on that we have historically done, I'm not sure whether that is the way forward, right? So, a lot of things will change.
Yeah. No, and interesting, right? Key insights, key takeaways for me is unlearning and learning. And that has to be the mojo and the motto of young consultants and some mature consultants like myself and the other generation. This is the era where you're going to do this. Probably the project methodologies are going to change. We have evolved from a traditional waterfall to agile. I don't know what the next new model is going to evolve with AI infused. I think you touched up a bit around four scrum teams to 10 scrum teams, but with lesser people solving more problems, broader problems, so on and so forth. So I think people have, and I think people listening to this may come up with a sort of a anxiety. Are their jobs going to go away? And it's a very sensitive topic with many of the people. But I think with when they listen to this particular thought around, hey, you know what, jobs that were menial, that were at the lower level, may be automated or may be given to AI. The coding, the testing, and probably even a path to production. In some cases, right, based upon which technologies people are using. But there would be other problems. It is
Yeah.
the onus.
And it is 100%, right? There will be more problems to be solved. And so it will always need people. Now, whether you keep up with the skills, so the chance, I mean, it's now a cliche, right? But nevertheless, it is very true. If you don't know how to use AI, there's a very good chance that you'll become obsolete in no time. There's just no question in my mind. Harsh as it might sound, that's the reality we are facing. So, but on the good side of this is it doesn't take a genius level IQ to learn these tools either, right? These tools have been made very, very simple, very powerful, very easy to learn and use. So it doesn't take, right? The onus is on us as individuals, right? As individual professionals to keep up, learn how to use these tools, because when the time comes, if you don't know and the friend sitting next to you knows, your friend is the one getting that role, right? That's a given. It's also the economic reality, right? As some jobs along the way, people will just not do anymore, right? It's like a good example is my old mom lives in India and finds it tougher to get a driver to drive her around because there just aren't enough people who want to do that as a full-time thing. But then the business model changed. Now there are apps and phone numbers where you can call and you can hire a driver for 3 hours that she needs. She doesn't really need a full-time driver, right? But she just needs access to one when she needs it.
When she needs it, yes.
But the world changed, right? From having, when I was a kid growing up in India, most families could afford to have a chauffeur, which for Americans might sound like an extreme luxury. It was not a luxury in India. It was a pretty common thing, right? Having a driver, sometimes a maid in your house, and so on, right? Were all normal things to happen. It was not an extreme luxury, right? Most middle class people were able to afford it. That's not the model anymore, right? How many people have a live-in person, a housekeeper anymore? Hardly anybody that I know. I know nobody in my friends and family who has one, right? Or needs one. Same thing with drivers. So the world, right? The commercial model will also change. So disruption is more or less guaranteed. Did that mean that all the drivers became jobless? No, they are actually making more money, right? So but you need to keep up with the skills. So if you are a Uber driver and you don't know how to use the app on your phone, and you refuse to have a smartphone, you probably will be out of a job, right? It is very easy to have a phone. The price of the phone and the ease of use is so high that that never became a problem, right? People just naturally transition to that model. It's no different for us, right? So world will change. It's a given. We know that. So don't, instead of fighting it, let's
Embrace it.
embrace it, right? Is the I mean,
Oh,
there are
fantastic.
societal implications of all kinds, right? There are all kinds of ethical difficulties, conversations go into UBI and so on. Those are all important conversations because the world is not evenly spread as an economy. But at least the consultants we are talking about, right? Totally a first world problem, right? These are all solutions within our control. Takes very little time to learn. We just need to put that effort and be smart about it, right? Rather than sit around worrying. Because if you all you do is sit around and worry, more or less for sure you're going to be on the losing side of that equation.
Yeah. And that brings me very, very nicely to my last segment, where I think you've touched a little bit about the ethical part of it. So, Vijay, in your experience, right? I mean, because the AI is evolving left, right, and center everywhere, and governments are finding it very, very hard to control the implications of it. So, how should firms handle ethical and privacy issues with it?
So there are already plenty of good laws on privacy and so on, right? Which all need to be just enforced heavily. The way I think about it is what you should control is the use case, not the technology, right? So if you use AI to create a better bomb or a chemical weapon or something, yeah, I mean, my morality doesn't allow me to work on those kinds of things, right? So I would say that we shouldn't, right? But if that uses a generative AI as a technology, should we ban generative AI as a technology? No, because it also does a lot for the good of humanity. So this is a fundamental criteria, right? On don't ban technology, but regulate use cases, right? Bad use case. And we don't need to think too hard about that, right? I mean, there are already plenty of good regulations that just need to be extended to cover what AI does. And regulations probably cannot keep up with innovation anyway, right? So that is the difference between legal and ethical, right? Lawmaking takes time, and it's a good thing that lawmaking takes time because it needs to be a deliberate process, right? The checks and balances we put into a system, if that just keeps changing every day, that's not very very good on a large society, right? That makes it very chaotic, which means ethics becomes more important, right? The Spider-Man policy, with great power comes great
Responsibility.
responsibility.
Yeah.
And this is something ethics education just needs to start. I mean, and I'm very happy that now a lot of high schools and colleges insist on teaching ethics. So like my daughter's generation, right? It's not even a minimal challenge. All of these kids that I talk to, I mean, ethics is like literally very high on the bar, which makes me very very happy. That was not the case in the generation I grew up with, right? Where ethics was a gray area. Now these kids, right, growing up, much different outlook, right? So I think the world is headed in the right direction in general, right? But you can't wait on laws alone, because if you wait for laws alone, laws are never going to catch up with the speed of innovation, right? Technology will outpace the legal system every single time. There's just no way around it. But good regulations need to happen, which means the regulators need to be well educated on these kinds of things, which probably means we as citizens should be worried about the impact of technology in the world. When we have a chance to do town halls with the elected representatives, these are all questions we should ask. Hey, what is your thought process on the changes AI will bring or crypto will bring and so on? And I'm not sure how many politicians have thought through this very carefully. Some have, for sure. I know several who have. I don't think it's mainstream, but it's not mainstream because people don't hold them responsible. So we have a civic responsibility to make sure that the people we elect to represent us should be aware of this, because there are massive societal imbalances that can happen, right? So our job is to hold our representatives accountable, but also select the people who we think can represent us. Those are the bigger bigger problems, right? That we as a society will.
No, thank you. Thank you, Vijay. And I know you're pressed for time, Vijay, but finally, what advice would you have for leaders embracing AI-driven technologies?
Very simple, which is to start doing it. Don't think about grand, big use cases. Commit to learning, iterating, putting small things into production, and do it with, ethically. The good thing is, I have no ethical concerns with the company I work for and the clients I support, right? And the day that changes is when I won't work with them, right? So that part is easy, right? I am yet to run into somebody who is unethical as a professional, right? So that part, so far, like I've been lucky that way. But I do work with a lot of people where inertia is a problem. And my point is, you don't need to commit to grand things, right? You just need to commit to change, because this disruption will come. And there is always a first mover advantage, right? So this is what I try to tell all my clients, especially the senior leaders. Whether it is about upskilling your team or putting new use cases or reimagining your business process, you can wait and try to be a fast follower, but the first person to get it right naturally has a big advantage. Look at OpenAI versus everybody else. Google came out with the transformer model, right? Why is it that OpenAI got all the mind share or most of the mind share? It's a first mover advantage, right? You have to take it to the people, let them see it, use it, figure it out. That is the kind of thing that we need a lot more of, right? For leaders to embrace the change and act on it. Understanding is only half the equation, right? If you don't act on it, then it's only for academic reasons, right? So yeah, my request, it's not advice, my request to leaders is act on it. If your job is to create the next generation of talent, figure out what is that new world going to look like and start putting policies in place now, right? Start small, but start. Because if you sit around waiting, you probably won't catch it.
Fantastic. On that note, Vijay, thank you very much for your time. We have covered and uncovered lots of topics, mysteries, and also, I believe, insinuations that some people might have. Great advice for clients and for the future leaders of tomorrow. Thank you again for your time, Vijay.
No, thank you.
Thank
Daksh.
you.